Hi, my name is Corme, and today we're going to be talking about healer balance going into the first tier Dragonflight, which is Vault of the Incarnates. And of course, I'm going to present it to you in tier list form because there's no better way. If you have no idea who I am, I'm someone who's always multi-class. I've been playing like at a Hall of Fame top 50 world double consistently since BFA, and I've made almost every single spec here in that time. I usually change mains a lot. If you're wondering what I'm playing in Dragonflight, I'm going to be maining Priest going into that. And then as far as raid testing goes, I went to every single raid testing with my guild. We had a guild group every single time, with the exception of LFR. We did not do LFR raid testing. And during that time, I tested every single healer, except I didn't do raid testing on Resto Shaman. But every other healer in spec I did, and we always had a Resto Shaman there testing it, which is why I never logged onto it to test it. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction about who I am before we get into this, and now let's get into it. So I'm basically going to start in S tier and then work my way down. No surprise, the first healer I'm putting in S tier is going to be Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin has just always had a chokehold on a spot in the raid because it has Aura Mastery. Aura Mastery is the only DR other than Rally and Cry that's like raid wide, good, and does not require you to be stacked. That's a big one, especially after testing a lot of these bosses. There are a lot of times where you need to be spread out and when you're taking damage and when AM is going to be good. I'm not sure if they're going to be stacked. Part of the problem with Holy Paladin as well is if you're not stacked, since their mastery does require you to be closer to them to do good healing, it's not always as good. That being said, they do have access to 40-yard Light of Dawn in their tree. I think they have a really good tree. They have a few good options with like Light of the Martyr build or like a range build or like a melee wings build. Like 4 different builds that I've seen. Some of them are a little bit mana hungry. And their throughput I've seen do really, really well. I've talked about that in some of my other videos. I think the average doesn't really show how well they do. I think they do really well. I'm not sure if it's going to be double Holy Paladin raid, but I would not be surprised if at least a few bosses were double Holy Paladin, depending on the stacking and what the fight needs and how good, again, Aura Mastery is, because Aura Mastery is just it is so good, especially with the recent health and damage taken changes that just happened. So yeah, Holy Paladin's there in S tier. It's in S tier every single tier until they get rid of Aura Mastery, which is why you've always seen a Holy Paladin on the final boss as long back as you can think. Almost as long back as I can think. Next healer that I'm putting in S tier, probably not another surprise, it always is going to do well in raid. That's Discipline Priest. So Discipline Priest has had a lot of changes on the beta. They were really strong, like overpowered, and everybody was just waiting for the ball to drop. Then the ball dropped, and then they picked it back up again a little bit, and they brought him more to like baseline, where like most Disc priests agree that like the changes were pretty fair. And since then they've done some like mana reduction things. They like buffed flash heal, like little like small tweaks here and there. But either way, I think they are definitely S tier. They have a very similar profile to what they've always had, with being able to do like burst healing and covering like those like hard parts in the fight where you need a lot of healing to get through them. They're like one of the better burst healers on this fight, because a lot of these fights, these healers kind of feel more like throughput healers, like Holy Paladin right now, because they're getting wings so often with their talents. They feel more like constant throughput healers than like what you would imagine with like season 1 of Shadowlands was, where it's like they were bursty healers with their Ashen Hollow and wings only every 2 minutes. Now this priest is got a bit more of like chokehold, I don't want to use that word again, on the market of burst healing. I'll talk about that a bit more later, how I feel about these ones burst healing. But yeah, I think Disc Priest is definitely going to be good for covering those hard parts of your fight. They are bringing PI, which is a damage increase. They are doing good damage themselves, even after the Mind Games nerfs. They're bringing Barrier, which is the best raid-wide DR you can get. 30% DR, yes, it requires you to stack, but it's still really strong. In most fights, you can find a spot in the fight to stack up. There's, I think, like 95% of fights, like even if you have to spread out during a fight, there's usually some point where you're stacking up. And it happens when you're taking damage. It just happens. There's been very few fights in the past few years I can think of where barrier was just like not a thing you really wanted. And if you don't have another priest, they also bring fort. I do think Shadow Priest will be in the meta though. We'll see. I'm not a DPS main, so I can't say that, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be there. I think these two definitely the only healers that I'm willing to put in S tier because I expect to see them on every single fight. To me, that's what means S tier means, is that they're going to be present in every single fight. And let's move down to A tier. Along with this priest, I think Holy Priest is also looking really good. Holy Priest, I don't think it's like the biggest powerhouse as far as throughput healing goes. However, I think it brings more tools than the other throughput healers. So yes, it's bringing Fort, it's bringing PI, and I think that having symbols is something that's, it used to be a little bit underrated, but I think after Sepultura, people started kind of catching on. If you plan out symbols correctly, if you don't know what symbols does, it gives everybody CDR on their own defensive. If you plan that out correctly, it's basically like another DR on your raid. Like what defensive that is CDR'd, it like varies from class to class. Like some are much better than others, but overall it is basically like another raid-wide CD, and you should use it that way. It's also mana back for your healers. And again, they're doing good healing. They were doing amazing damage, now they're doing okay damage. And the other great advantage is that if you have a priest that can play both Disc and Holy, it is such a boon to your raid, because depending on the fight, they can play one or the other, and then you don't feel bad about like investing things like gear into that character. Because what kind of happens is if like you have like a 5 healer roster, it gets a little like iffy sometimes knowing like which ones are going to be important to give to you and prioritize and stuff like that, like as the tier goes on, unless you already have like your comps figured out. But if you have a priest that can play both specs, it's a little bit like a no-brainer, since both specs are good. I think last year in Sepultura was the first time we've seen in a long time where Holy has been really good. Maybe it was good before that, but it was hard to play because of switching covenants being like such a permanent thing. Yeah, if you have someone that can play both of those, I think it makes it really, really good. Okay, another healer that I'm going to be putting into A tier is Mistweaver. So Mistweaver right now can do a lot of single target damage, 2 target damage, and healing based on that. They have a lot of constant throughput, just like constantly throwing like renewing miss out there, talents that are putting like enveloping miss out there, and it's just fist sweeping for the most part. So good damage, good healing. Their biggest weakness is that they don't have good CDs right now. In testing, some people are playing Yu'lon, some people are playing Chi-Ji. Either way, it is a good burst of healing. Like obviously those things do a lot of healing, but it does require you to be stacked to do amazing healing, and it's just not that amazing of healing to begin with. So Mistweaver I definitely see as being the top pick for 5 heal fights. I definitely think we can see 5 heal fights with the recent change to, again, increasing our health and increasing our damage taken. 5 heal fights are now more likely than they were before. Also, if you have something with like 2 Disc Priests, I think having a Mistweaver will work well, or maybe like a Disc Priest and a Resto Druid, like, but those are basically like the CD based classes right now that will do like lots of like bursts of healing. And then you have a Mistweaver to like fill in those gaps. I think that it can do really well. I think it can do well in other situations, but that's just, I feel like its biggest weakness for sure, and the reason you're not going to see it on every single fight is because it is just constant throughput. So like on a bursty fight, it's all right, but it's not as good as it could be for like some of these other specs. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention about Mistweaver is Mistweaver, sorry, can also be your Mystic Touch. In the past, we've always seen a Brewmaster meta, but Brewmaster right now is looking tragically bad, and so we might actually not have a Brewmaster. And Windwalker single target damage isn't that amazing. There are a few cleave fights where that might be amazing, but like it may not have a spot, and Mistweaver might be your best access to a physical debuff. So yeah. Next I'm going to look at Resto Shaman, and I'm putting Resto Shaman in B tier, which makes me sad because I made Resto Shaman the most. So Resto Shaman has always been seen as a very good progression healer due to its mastery. So they do more healing based on their target having a lower health percentage. So the more health you're missing, the more healing the shaman can do to you, which is really good on progression. And it got buffed a little bit with the health changes that I keep mentioning. However, I do want to mention that Shaman Mastery no longer feels as unique as it used to. The only other healer that used to heal more based on a lower health percentage was Disc Priest with Twist of Fate, which was also has always been pretty decent for them. However, Disc Priest has Twist of Fate now, or always has. And in addition, Holy Priest also has Twist of Fate. Mistweaver has also gained something called Close to Heart, which increases their healing based on their target having below 35% HP. And then Resto Druid has Regenesis, which increases their Trank and Rejuve healing based on missing HP. And then Preservation's Mastery is also based on missing HP, although it's relative to the Preservation healer's missing HP, but played correctly, similar to Resto Shaman Mastery. That being said, none of them are the same as Resto Shaman Mastery. They're all little bits of variation, but I do think that this has been harder hitting to Resto Shaman than most people, or I haven't seen anybody really talk about this. It's like, it was an identity, it was a part, like core part of Resto Shaman. Like you think of Shaman, you think of like Spirit Link, and you think of their mastery for progression healing, and those being their biggest strengths. And it feels like they definitely took a big dip in that strength based on these other healers all getting access to something similar. I don't think that's their main problem though. I think their main problem is just their tuning. Like their spells just they aren't hitting. Like out of all these throughput healers, they are doing the least amount of healing, and even like less than Holy Paladin most of the time. The only really redeeming thing that they're bringing right now is Spirit Link, which is why I have them in B and I don't have them down here. If they didn't have Spirit Link, they'd be down here. Sorry, but they would. Spirit Link can be an amazing, it is hands down, if you can be stacked for it, like the best raid CD, because nobody's going to die in a Spirit Link. When there is a very scary moment in a fight, like either your whole raid is dying or nobody is dying in that Spirit Link, most likely, for the most part. Super strong CD, super good for the type of healing that we might be seeing with these recent health changes, where we'll be spending a lot of time with lower health pools for saving those few squishy people in your raid. So I think there are definitely gonna be some fights where even if Shaman isn't that amazing, you're bringing them just for the Spirit Link, because that CD is so good, which is why I'm putting them in B tier. Okay, next healer I want to talk about is Resto Druid. So I am putting Resto Druid in B tier. I know some people are probably confused because they're like, oh, Resto Druid, they're doing a lot of healing. They are doing a lot of healing. But I think with the changes we've seen recently, they're going to be doing less than Mistweaver. And Resto Druid isn't bringing anything very unique to your raid. And what I mean is that they are somewhere between a constant and a bursty throughput healer, but I think for the most part that them and Disc Priest do a similar job for healing instead of a raid. Like you use their CDs to cover like the hard parts of the fight. However, Resto Druids aren't really doing that much more than Disc Priest, and they're also just not bringing PI or barrier or anything like that. They do bring Mark of the Wild. However, there's definitely going to be a Boomkin in your raid. Like Boomkins are doing decently well right now. And yeah, like they're not bad. Like I'm definitely not saying like you can't use them instead of a Disc Priest, like to like do the same job. Like they can definitely do the same job. It's just they're gonna do the same job and they're not gonna bring PI and they're not gonna bring barrier for your raid. And that's just it. It's definitely possible. It's just that I think it's just a worse version of Disc Priest right now. And the last healer, this one is so hard. This is the one I struggle with, but I think I am going to put it in B tier because I kind of view it as something that's niche. Like your raid needs to be pretty stacked. I think there are a few fights where Preservation can do really well, which is Kurog, where you're stacked up, Broodmother, where there's a lot of ads to hit, and possibly the last boss, but it's so hard for me to say that without us having any testing on it. If you don't know, nobody has gotten to fight the last boss on any difficulty. They basically are making it blind the same way they did the last two bosses in last year, where no one knew anything about that last boss except for what they could read inside of the adventure guide that's on beta. So yeah. Preservation Evoker relies a lot on everyone being stacked up. I do think they're healing, like if you are stacked up, it's definitely better than Mistweaver. It's definitely better than Mistweaver, but they aren't bringing a whole, like I said, Mistweaver can bring like Mystic Touch and stuff like that, but there isn't something like amazingly unique that Preservation is bringing either. And so I think choosing to have someone main Preservation Evoker is a little bit riskier than having people like main these classes up here, which are good in like almost all situations. They do amazing healing when you're stacked up. Rewind does great healing with the health changes. And Zephyr is a good CD, but it's only for 5 people. It's their ability that makes it so that everybody takes 20% less AoE damage, which is like saying like you get 20% avoidance, but it's only good for 5 people. And yeah, I think it's going to be hard to play the first tier for most healers. I definitely think there will be people in the top end guilds that are going to pull it off and make it look amazing. And I hope that I'm wrong about where it stands inside this this tier list. But I think for the most part, a lot of these fights are pretty spread out, and it's going to be harder to play than these other healers, and it's not bringing something unique and amazing enough for you to want to bring it. Yeah, that's basically all I have to say. And then as far as like the last boss goes, the one thing that could make Preservation Evoker amazing is they have this talent which does a lot of damage to a shield. I'll put it up here because I can't remember the name of it. And there are phases in that fight where you do have to break a shield. And if they can get that talent and do a lot of damage to that shield, it could actually be super, super useful. But again, it depends on how often does that shield come up? How important is that shield? And a whole bunch of other factors. And it also has to do with how much stacking and not stacking there's in that fight. And it's going to be hard to say until we actually get in there to fight. But yeah, that's everything that I have to say. The last remaining thing that I do actually want to say that I forgot to say right after that. I think the gaps between these healers really aren't that large. I think in the past, the gaps between healers have been much bigger, and we're actually looking at a tier where the healer balancing, I like it a lot. Like the gaps between these healers aren't that bad. Like I could see a lot of combos between any of these healers doing really, really well. Yeah, that's just a note I want to end on, to not take this tier list or any tier list, especially not mine, too seriously. Anyways, I hope you have a good one. Let me know what you thought in the comments.